Let's dive into what we're going to talk about today. So today I'm doing something a little different. I don't actually have a sermon for you today. I've never done this before. What I do have, though, is a story for you. And I kind of went back and forth on how much time do I take to share this story? Do I do it like a short little version of it and then go into a sermon? And as I wrote this, I realized I couldn't do either justice if I spent 15 minutes on the story and 15 minutes on a sermon. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. So I decided I just want to spend this time sharing a story with you and then spending some time worshiping and reflecting on that story at the end of it. And to start that off, I want to give you a Hebrew word that I would like all of us to remember. It's matzava. Can you guys say that? Matzava. Matzava. It's a pillar or a stone of remembrance, and it's one that the ancient Israels would put up often when God did something amazing, to remind them of that story, something that they can call back on. And it kind of reminded me of, I grew up in Moab, Utah, doing a lot of hiking. And there's these little pillars that they would put up on trails to make sure that people didn't gloss, to remind you, hey, this is the trail you're on. This is the guide that which you're on. I think we called them cairns. And you would walk and you'd see these pillars and you realize you're on the right trail. You realize that you're in the right spot. And I often think of matzava as these cairns, these pillars, as you're walking. Things that you remember, that you see, that can help guide you further along your trail, your road. And we see him in things like Genesis 28, one of these famous scenes from the Bible, about halfway through that first book, where Jacob dreams of God meeting him at a place that he would call Bethel. He dreams where he sees these angels going up and down on this place. He says, here, this is where God meets on earth, the house of God, Bethel. And he says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He then takes a stone and he sets up a matzava. It's actually the stone he laid on, which always made me laugh, because like, who sleeps on a stone, right? He takes the stone with his head and he puts up a matzava, or a pillar, a stone of remembrance here, and said, I want to remember that here, this is where God met me. This is the house of God. I want to remember this story. I want people who come here for generations to remember what God did here in this place, a matzava. There to remember what God had done and how he met him there. A marker that indicated that God is in this place. That's what a matzava is. It's a sacred marker built as a witness. And this is that's the key word I want to reiterate through this story, is it is a witness of what the Lord did, and so we can be encouraged. So this is the beginning of my story, is to think about matzava. Matzava, because today I want to share a story of how we can remember this, and a story of what God did here the last 6 months. You guys excited? Got quiet all of a sudden. Okay. So a pillar or sacred marker in our minds for when God acted on behalf of his people at Real Life Church that we can remember as a part of our story today, where we can say, surely the Lord is in this place. But first, I think we should get some backstory, because this is a story that didn't just begin 6 months ago. It's really a story of our existence the last 6 years as Real Life Church Pullman in its own entity. Our church community has been through a lot in the last 6 years. How many of you have been around for 6 years? There's quite a few of us that have been around for 6 years plus, probably. And you think about it, it feels like maybe 16 years to some of us, right? You know, we've navigated what church looked like through a global pandemic. I don't know of many generations of churches that had to do that. You know, we had to then recover from some of the isolation and byproducts of walking through said pandemic. You know, 4 years ago, many of you went through a very difficult, intense leadership transition here. That saw the senior pastor resign as a result. It's a very difficult thing to walk through. If it wasn't by the grace of God and many of you stepping in to lead and minister and just continue to show up faithfully, it's possible that we're not sitting in this room right now because of these things. By the time I got here 3 years ago, this community had found its footing again and was ready to move forward, again, thanks to much of your perseverance and faithfulness and just deciding like the Lord wants to continue to meet us here, even when it was rocky. Yet there were still things that were difficult. difficult to navigate. One of those things was the financial situation of this church. You know, I've always gave that elder group that brought me in a lot of credit because they took a real risk in hiring somebody. Because at the moment they hired me, I think we were, and Terry can probably verify this better than I could, I think we were around $50,000 in the hole when I was hired in July of 2023. I don't know about you, business decisions, that's not always the best decision to hire when you're in that place. Right? It took a lot of trust in order to, in the Lord, and it trust in kind of what God, would they believe God was doing in this place. And I know a lot of times when I bring money up, or anybody in church bring money up, it always gives a little bit of a creepy feel to it, a little shiver up our spine. But I want to just take a minute and pause and talk about that for a second, because money in church, I know, is a sticky subject. If you're new here today, you're like, great. Right? Like, these are always the worst things to talk about. It's like your first Sunday, you walk in, you have no context whatsoever, and this is what you hear. Just bear with us, please. Okay, I know. You know, many of us have heard stories of corruption in churches, lack of financial transparency in churches, cover-ups within churches. Many of us are familiar with those things or even have experienced those things. I know from firsthand how bad that can be. And these things leave bad tastes in our mouths where we're just like, let's just not even talk about it. It's hard. It's hard for any leader in the church to get up and talk about it. The only real topic that makes me nervous is things like this. I've been doing this for 10 years and this still makes me nervous. But I do know that we have to, right? We have to. It's helpful, I think, to think about the differences. And when we're talking about money in church, to think about it in the way of house and a home. And I talked about this a bit last fall in November. And this is kind of part two to that sermon, I guess you could say. This story is part two to that. So when you're thinking about money in church, I want you to think about a house and a home, the difference between a house and a home, because this church is my home. It is my home. I call this place my home. You are my home. And no matter what happens or where we meet or what goes on in the future of this community, that will never change. You will always be my home. You're my family. That's just how Jesus organized his people. Paul's favorite word for the church is adelphoi, one of our key values here. It means brothers and sisters. It's a family term. Christians were confusing to their culture because they had more of a sibling relationship within their communities that kind of made a lot of the pagan world kind of up their nose at them a little bit in that sense. And no circumstance will ever change the family ties that we have together. This is our home, that Christ has brought you into a family of believers through Christ. It is a home, and it doesn't matter what happens, this is home. This is home. And whether you give financially to this church or not, it doesn't matter, you're family. But then there are the practical things that any family needs to be able to discuss, such as a house. A family needs a house, and we are no different. Houses are things that must happen in order, kind of the practical things that must happen in order to take care of something. You know, houses need to be clean, they need to be taken care of, they need to be paid for. Something as you get older you realize is a bigger burden than you realize as growing up. If you're able to care for your house properly. And it's important that everyone, I think, should be able to know the needs of the house, don't you? Don't you want to be in the know? I like being in the know, don't you? And I do my best to try to be transparent as much as I can. Transparency is something that I have been gifted with, to the chagrin of some, because TMI might be an issue. There's a possibility that you sit with me long enough, I might give you too much information. But I do think it's important that transparency is a ruling factor here. So while we have a home with each other as a family, we still must discuss the status and needs of the house. So for the next little bit of this story, I'm going to be talking about the house, not necessarily the home, when we talk about finances in the church. Now, when it comes to Real Life's historical financial position and things like this, from 2020, which is when this church kind of started as its own entity, I kind of call that the beginning point, through 2024, we've always had a hard time ever making it above the red line in financially. I don't think we've ever done it in 2020 through 2024. We were always spending more than we were taking in And there were reserves and things like that, so we were okay. But it was not a good place to be in. Anybody knows personal finances, it's not a good place to be in. So going into the fall of 2025, so last fall in 2025, we had done, I think, a pretty good job of cutting everything down, trimming it down to a pretty well-oiled machine. We closed down the coffee shop for the Monday through Friday operations, for example, which was really hurting us. And while we're the closest to balance we had ever been in our history, we were still falling short by around $4,000 a month. And what's worse was our building loan was now up for renewal. So something we had no control over whatsoever. And this leads me into the fun topic of church lending. And if I mess this up, bear with me. This is not my forte. But in 2020, in order for us to build or to have this church, and to purchase this church and to do the build out and everything that you see in here, we had to take out a commercial loan. And most commercial loans, they have a 5-year renewal clause, if you're familiar with those. And it just means that basically the loan is going to be rewritten every 5 years. Interest rates change. So, when you buy a house, you have a 30-year mortgage, and that's just your interest rate's locked in. Some of you are like 2.3%. You can never buy a house ever again, right? You're kind of locked in. Well, for us, we have the 5 years. We have a 5-year where that renews every year. And sometimes I think that can work in your favor, right? 5-year renewal, the interest rates are low. Wow, you get a lower interest rate. Or it goes up. And in the fall of 2025, how many of you want to guess which one it was? It went up. It was going to increase. In November, the lender at the time that gave us the money to buy this building, which I always will appreciate, notified us that the loan interest rate was going to go from 7%, which is what we got in 2020, to 9% at the end of the year. It's a big increase. That's an additional $4,000 a month on top of the $4,000 already that we were lacking, that we were looking at January. So this is November. We're looking at January going, how is this going to work? We'll be having $8,000 a month deficit going into 2026. They were also asking for additional cash to be placed in reserve, and we didn't have that. We didn't have any money for that. I even heard stories, other Christians were contacting me, had no idea what was going on in our situation, and they're like, hey, we should let you know that we do a lot of ministry to the occult members here in the Palouse, and they're actually cursing your church for financial difficulties. And I was like, just cherry on top. That makes a lot of sense. I was like, I think if they got to know us, they'd probably like us, but... So we were low on money. We didn't have enough equity in this building to find a new lender. We were completely ineligible. I think Terry probably has a few more gray hairs in his head over the last 6 months trying to find a solution to this. And we were just too high risk, which made a lot of sense. I don't blame any of them. I don't know. I wouldn't have written this alone at all. It was a heavy moment, I think, for all of us in leadership. And as we reflect on that, I think anybody who was in those rooms hearing this thing kind of up front, I think we all had a kind of that pit in our stomach. And maybe you've been there, where you're just like, we have no idea what to do. You ever feel trapped? Ever feel like your back was against the wall? It was a scary place. I always told people, it felt like you were walking up a mountain with a heavy backpack, and someone comes up beside you, is like, hey, I think you need about 50 more pounds. There you go. And you're like, there's no way I'm going to make it to the top of this thing. That's how it felt. And if it's okay to be vulnerable for a minute, I'm going to kind of can I invite you into how I was feeling during that time? Because I was stressed. Many of you remember, my body broke out in shingles. Like, it's kind of funny now, but then it wasn't as funny. I broke out in shingles, and something I'd never experienced before. I thought one of my kids just like horse kicked me in the side or something. And then I started to see what was going on. I didn't really connect the two things necessarily, because I think in my heart and in my head, I was like, I trust the Lord. But my body was like, I don't trust him. Like, this is scary. As much as I get up here and I say, trust the Lord, trust the Lord, trust the Lord, I was honestly afraid. I was saying one thing and I was definitely feeling another thing, knowing all these things that were going on in my head. I had a hard time trusting him in those moments. Have you ever had those moments where you're like, I trust you, and I don't at the same time. It was very much that I believe, help my unbelief moment. Like that verse in John really stuck with me in that moment. I remember thinking, I was afraid of what people might think. You know, you always have those people that come to mind that you feel like want to see you fail. That was kind of where I felt. It's like, oh, and there was kind of that ego, that pride moment that kind of comes up. I'm like, well, I can't look like a failure. Okay, I'm just being vulnerable with how I was feeling. I felt inadequate as a leader. Now, I feel inadequate as a leader. Like here I was, I came up here, and this is the result. I didn't know what to do. I think a lot of us felt that way. I think if you talk to some of the elders who were, and this was like right when we were adding new elders too, so we're like, welcome to the fire, baby. Like that poor group of new elders came in like right at this moment. And I think we were all just kind of feeling this tense moment. All the leadership, I think, felt like their backs were against the wall. What we didn't realize though, and this is what most people don't want to hear when your back's against the wall, is this is exactly where God wants you. I've said that to people in the worst moments, and they've looked at me and go, please don't tell me that. But that's exactly what happened, is that's exactly where God wanted us. In the moment where we were trying to find the solutions, trying to figure it out, dealing with our own pride, ego, stress, and fear, he was calling us into something deeper. Because the only place we had was prayer. The only thing we knew what to do. And I am so grateful for some of the elders who decided, let's just get together and pray. We got in this room, the board, a few other leaders all got together, and we started just praying, crying out to the Lord in this room about what can we do? Help us. We're stuck. We're hurt. We're afraid. What will happen? Help us. And I don't know how long we were in here. We were in here for a while, right? I don't know how long it was. We were hour and a half praying. It's a long time to be praying. We started discussing and just kind of getting together and praying about what was God doing in this moment. I know others who held prayer times before and after service. I was hearing about small groups praying throughout the week. In fact, I have a bunch of guys that I meet with during the week, and they were super supportive, praying with us and praying for us through this as well. And one thing the Lord continued to lay on our hearts, and that with multiple conversations and talking with people through this, was just tell people. Just be transparent with you, with the family, with community, where we just laid everything out and said, here you go, here's where we are. Now, I don't know about you, but it's not always easy for me to ask for help. Is it easy for you to ask for help? I think some people have the gift of being able to ask for help. I don't always have that. And it was so nerve-wracking to get up there and go, help us. But I think the Lord does his best work. And remember this, in humility within community. When we are walking in humility amongst each other in community, God does some of his best work. So that's what we did. Got up here in November, shared about the situation openly and candidly about what was going on, just like I'm doing now in this story. We made a video, we put it on our website, just threw it out there. I didn't have any target numbers. I wasn't like, hey, let's try to raise this much. This was not a campaign initiative, nothing. We just were like, here is where we are as a community. And I just wanted to tell people where all that I knew. I wanted to help shepherd you through this somehow, because that's my heart. I just want to help shepherd. How do we think about this? So we prayed and we shared it openly and transparently with everybody and hoped. We just put a little hope out there, a little mustard seed of faith, uncertain of what would happen. I had no idea what was going to happen. I didn't have any expectation even. I was like, well, we did it. Let's see what happens. Nobody did in that room. Now, I believe that everything good that we have comes from the Lord, and that he is our ultimate provider in the lean and plentiful years. You guys with me on that? But I also know the Lord gives us the responsibility to steward what he has entrusted to us. That we are to steward what he has entrusted to us. And you should know, I have no idea who gives at this church. Not a clue. I have no idea how much or little or who does and who doesn't. That is not something I look at. That's not something I think about. The only thing I see are like weekly numbers on a spreadsheet. That's it. but I have no idea, nor do I want to know. But upon hearing where the church was, many of you began to pray and to think about what God has given you to help in our time of need. And I think this is one of two Matzava moments in this church's history. Remembering these moments are really important. Because in the months of just November and December, we saw a 234% increase in giving. That's a lot. 234% increase. You know, when I see that number, when I think about that kind of an increase, there are a few things I think about. I know that this was people giving and trusting to the Lord with their money for the first time. I know this was people just saying, I'm going to trust even though I don't know. It's a hard thing to do. I know this must have required hard conversations as a family. I imagine husband and wife sitting down talking about what they could do and what they could afford to do, and maybe there was some stress in that. I know it required people trusting that when Jesus says it's better to give than to receive, that they were probably trusting in that idea. It tells me that people care about this community and what the Lord is doing here amongst us, which means the world to me. That people care about what God is doing here. It tells me that he has drawn people in who want to steward and be generous in what the Lord has already entrusted to them. It says something about our culture. It says something about who we are as a people. And I couldn't be more proud of this family in that response. I'll never forget. Years from now, I hope that I can also continue to witness and share about the faithful response of this family in a time of need. And I recognize this is not just a select few. It wasn't. This could only happen if a community comes together with one heart, one mind, and chooses to act. I think that's the first pillar of remembrance, the first moment that we need to remember. You guys ready for the second one? No? Because of your generosity in giving, and because of that huge increase in November and December, Terry, our finance director, contacted some previous lenders who before couldn't help us. Just to double check. It wasn't really part of the plan. He just was, he was doing Terry thing. He's a helper. He's a problem solver. And he was contacting some. And one lender that got back to us was called CDF Capital. CDF Capital is their name. And since we're just introducing CDF Capital, I want to make sure that you understand what they do. So they actually gave us a video that I'll play that we'll have Corbin and them play for that kind of introduces them because they've been a great partner for us at Real Life. So let's play that video real quick.
For nearly 70 years, CDF Capital has been helping churches grow. We understand the values that matter to you: legacy, stewardship, and making wise choices with your finances. And at CDF Capital, your investment isn't merely financial. It's a legacy-building tool that extends beyond today and into eternity. In a world where financial decisions can be complex, partnering with what God is doing becomes the wisest choice. God calls his people into a story of transformation, and we help people like you embrace their part in this story by putting their finances to work for the kingdom. Here's how it works. We partner with local churches to help them buy and build a permanent home for ministry by lending them the capital they need. As those churches grow, they repay us with interest, and we pass a portion of that interest back to you. Our straightforward process ensures your involvement is seamless. Since 1953, our system has helped over 1,000 churches and ministries grow, directing almost $2 billion to this important mission. So be part of the story. Experience the joy of stewardship, the profound impact that lasts beyond your lifetime, and the blessing of aligning your resources with God's purpose. Join thousands of kingdom-minded investors who are transforming communities, one church at a time. Contact CDF Capital today.
What they said. Now, CDF helped us in that last kind of final hour. This is the beginning of 2026, when we started to process what was happening. And without their help, I don't know if we would have been able to continue as much as we could. I think it would have been a very difficult road ahead, even with the givings that we were given. And because of the increase of this community, they were able to qualify us. We were like right on the line. It was like you could go either way, but they still were able to qualify us. And this was huge news for us. They were able to offer us a much better term where instead of a 9% loan that we were looking at, we were able to get at 6.9%, actually less than what we got in 2020. Better than what we were expecting. I think prime was like 6.5. Well, we were ecstatic over this. This means that our monthly payment is actually less than we've been paying in the last 5 years. They also required far less in reserve, and because of your givings, we were able to satisfy that without overstretching or dipping into ministry. We went through an appraisal process where our building appraised, and I remember you got Corbin and Tiny back there painting walls all week. Like they were really going to town, making sure this place looked nice. And that appraisal came in much higher than we expected, which will really help us out down the road. Going into the fall of last year, we would have thought this was completely impossible. None of us would have seen that in January of this year, this would be the options that we had before us. But because of your stewardship, your faith, your perseverance, as you've done for so many years, God's providence through the resources he has given you, this was finished and accomplished. On April 1st, we were able to sign with CDF and begin this new partnership. It was a huge blessing to us and a 10,000-pound boulder off of our chests to be able to have this release. I think that the full story of the Matzava moments here are those two things. You have your response and then the opening of door to get into something less expensive for us to carry that opens up, again, opportunities for further ministry here down the road. Moments where we were crushed in uncertainty, yet the Lord met us there and a community that walked with us together through it. That we remember the story when you lack provision. Remember this. Don't let these things kind of go away after time. Like remember these moments. This is God doing things in the reality right now amongst us. It is a witness of how God is with us. A witness to it. It's a story of what God can do when he gets his people together. And it's something I think we can celebrate as we get to witness what God did here amongst us. Moving forward, what's been exciting in 2026 is that we're still seeing the Lord provide through this community. Already just from January and April, we've already seen a 30% increase in giving this year from prior years. We've been blessed by other churches even. Other churches have seen what we're doing and who we are and have given to us, which is not usual. It's a little out of the ordinary to see churches give other churches money, which I hope we can change one day. By God's grace, your continued faithfulness and stewardship, we can be a church that will minister in the Palouse for generations to come. Because as we think about this, I would love it if we just paid the loan off and we were free and we could just use it to bless this area. And that might be a reality someday. It could also take a long time. And we might be doing it for the next group that's here, for the next generation of Real Life Church. It might be the kids in our kids ministry who get to experience and do that blessing because of the stewardship and faithfulness of the people in this room, which I think is, again, a great witness of who God is. Either way, God is providing. So I ask you this, pray for the elders of this church. Pray as they continue to think how best to steward and walk through this season, how to always try to be transparent with all of you, with our family, with our community, that one day that we'll be able to pay this loan off entirely. That will be quite the celebration, wouldn't it? To be able to then give more into our community at large, because I just have a dream of one day just giving people money. That sounds great. That's a good job. I'll volunteer for that. I'd be a great philanthropist that way. Let's thank God, though, today for all that he has done in community.